The red dust of New Haven swirled across the landing pad as 3 massive warships descended through the atmosphere. David Ross watched from the colony's observation tower, his jaw tight. He had seen ships like these before, back when Earth first made contact with the Drathari Empire. Nothing good ever followed their arrival. The largest vessel touched down with a thunderous boom that rattled the tower's windows. Its hull was dark green, covered in scales that weren't decorative but actual armor plating grown from some biological process humans still didn't understand. The loading ramp descended and out came the Drathari soldiers. They moved like predators, each one standing 7 feet tall with reptilian features that seemed designed to terrify. Their scales shifted colors in the sunlight from deep emerald to almost black. David's radio crackled. It was Governor Phillips, his voice strained with forced politeness. "All defense personnel, stand down. We have diplomatic visitors. I repeat, stand down." Diplomatic visitors didn't bring 3 warships and 2 battalions of shock troops. David knew this, and so did everyone else watching the Drathari march through the colony's main street. Colonists hurried inside their homes, pulling children away from windows. The aliens paid them no attention, moving with the confidence of conquerors who had done this 1,000 times before. By nightfall, the entire colony leadership sat in the council chamber, facing the Drathari delegation. The alien commander stood at the head of the table, his presence dominating the room. His name was Sarkin, and he wore armor that seemed to be part of his own body. Behind him stood 6 warriors in black combat suits, their eyes cold and unblinking. "This world now belongs to the Drathari Empire," Sarkin announced without preamble. His voice was surprisingly smooth, almost pleasant, which somehow made his words more terrifying. "You have 48 hours to accept our terms. You will work the mines under our supervision. You will provide 70% of all extracted resources. You will accept Drathari law and governance." Governor Phillips cleared his throat. He was a politician, trained in negotiation and compromise. "Surely we can discuss more favorable terms. This colony is recognized by the Galactic Council. We have legal rights to this planet." Sarkin's head tilted and something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. "The Galactic Council protects species with power. You have none. Your Earth is far away. Your military is small. You are alone here." He gestured to one of his warriors who stepped forward carrying a data pad. "These are our terms. Sign or we will take this world by force. We have done this on 16 other colonies. All chose survival." David watched the exchange from his position by the wall. He wasn't part of the official delegation, just the head of colony security. 50 armed guards against 2 battalions of alien warriors. The math was brutal and simple, but something in Sarkin's casual dismissal of humanity made anger burn in David's chest. After the Drathari left, the council chamber erupted in arguments. Some wanted to sign immediately, others wanted to send for help, though the nearest human military base was 3 months away at fastest travel. Governor Phillips sat with his head in his hands, the weight of 50,000 lives pressing down on him. David stood and walked to the window. Outside, Drathari patrols moved through the streets, establishing their presence. He had fought in Earth's last war before joining the colonial service. He knew what occupation looked like, knew what happened to populations under hostile control. The Drathari term sounded reasonable until you read the fine print. 70% of resources meant starvation rations for the colonists. Drathari law meant no rights, no protections, no future. "We should fight," he said quietly. The room went silent. Governor Phillips looked up, his face pale. "Fight, David. They have warships. Professional soldiers. We're miners and farmers. We're humans," David replied. He turned to face the council. "I've read the reports from other colonies that submitted. The Drathari work populations to death within 5 years. They take the young for labor camps. They destroy everything that makes a place worth living in. Signing those papers is a slow death sentence. And fighting is a fast one," another counselor snapped. "At least if we cooperate, some of us survive." David shook his head. "I've studied the Drathari. They're powerful, yes, but they're used to species that calculate odds and choose survival. They expect rational surrender. They've never fought an enemy that refuses to quit." Dr. Amy Liu, the colony's chief scientist, spoke up from her corner. "What are you proposing exactly?" "Resistance. Guerrilla tactics. We know this planet better than they do. We have mining equipment that can be weaponized. We have tunnels, terrain advantages, and something they don't expect." David's voice grew stronger. We have nothing to lose. That makes us dangerous. The debate raged for hours. Finally, Governor Phillips made his decision. He would stall the Drathari, ask for more time to review the terms while David prepared a backup plan. If negotiation failed, at least some would be ready to fight. David left the chamber as dawn broke over New Haven. He had 48 hours to organize a resistance against an empire that had conquered 100 worlds. The odds were impossible. The Drathari had their Serpent Guard, elite warriors bred for combat. They had technology humans barely understood. They had experience crushing rebellions. But as David walked through the quiet streets, passing homes where families slept unaware of how close they were to slavery, he felt something cold and determined settle in his chest. The Drathari had their Serpent. Fine. Humans had something too. They had stubbornness. They had the ability to look at impossible odds and fight anyway. They had what his old commander used to call honeybadger fury, the refusal to quit even when every rational thought screamed surrender. The Warlord had made one critical mistake. He had given them 48 hours. That was enough time to remind the Drathari that some prey bites back. Governor Phillips signed the surrender documents with shaking hands. The Drathari had rejected his request for more time, and the council voted 8-4 in favor of submission. David watched from outside the government building as Sarkin emerged with his warriors, satisfaction evident in his posture. The Warlord believed he had won without firing a shot, just like the previous 16 colonies. He was wrong. David had spent the previous 2 days meeting with specific colonists in quiet corners, speaking in whispers that security cameras couldn't catch. Not everyone wanted to surrender. Otto Schmidt, the German who ran the mining operations, had lost his family to an occupation back on Earth. He understood what was coming. Amy Lou had read the medical reports from occupied colonies, seen what Drathari labor camps did to human bodies. Ben Hayes was only 22, fresh from Earth and full of righteous anger at the idea of bowing to alien conquerors. There were others. Not many, just 47 people willing to trade certain death fighting for probable death surrendering. David met them in the deepest mining tunnel, 3 kilometers below the surface where Drathari sensors couldn't reach. The tunnel walls still radiated heat from the day's drilling. They think we've given up, David said, his voice echoing in the chamber. They're moving occupation forces into the colony right now. By tomorrow they'll start stripping the mines and processing the population. Processing? Someone asked. Amy stepped forward, projecting images on the tunnel wall. They separate families. Adults go to labor camps. Children are taken for what they call education, which is really indoctrination. The elderly and sick are classified as non-productive. She didn't need to explain what happened to non-productive populations. Otto placed a heavy case on the ground and opened it. Inside were blasting charges used for mining, enough explosives to level several city blocks. I requisitioned everything I could before they locked down the warehouses. We have maybe 6 hours before they notice. David looked at the faces around him. They were scared, and they should be. What he was asking them to do was suicide by any reasonable measure. But there was also something else in their eyes, something the Drathari hadn't accounted for. Humans could be terrified and defiant at the same time. Here's what we know, David began, pulling up a map of the colony. The Drathari have established their main base at the western landing pad. They've got approximately 200 soldiers in the colony, with another 300 on the ships. Their elite unit, what they call the Serpent Guard, hasn't deployed yet. Sarkin is keeping them in reserve. Why? Ben asked. Because he doesn't think he needs them. We're just soft humans who signed surrender papers. David smiled grimly. Let's prove him wrong. The plan was simple because complicated plans fell apart under pressure. They would hit the Drathari supply depot at midnight, when the aliens were least active. Drathari biology favored daytime operations. Their night vision was poor, which was why they relied on sensor equipment after dark. Equipment that could be disrupted by the electromagnetic pulses from mining charges. They moved through the tunnels like ghosts, emerging at various points around the colony. David's group consisted of 12 people, all carrying packs loaded with Otto's mining explosives. The Drathari had posted guards at the supply depot, but only 4 of them. They clearly didn't expect trouble from a population that had surrendered. The first guard died silently, a mining pick driven through the soft scales at his throat. The second barely had time to raise his weapon before Otto's team took him down. The third and fourth managed to trigger an alarm. But by then, David's people were already inside the depot, placing charges on fuel reserves and ammunition stockpiles. They had 3 minutes before Drathari reinforcements arrived. David counted down, watching his people work with desperate efficiency. Amy rigged the charges to Otto's detonator, her hands steady despite the blaring alarms. Ben covered the entrance, his stolen Drathari rifle feeling foreign in his grip. 30 seconds, David called out. Everyone out! They ran, not bothering with stealth anymore. Behind them, Drathari soldiers poured into the depot, securing what they thought was a minor intrusion. Sarkin himself was probably being woken up, annoyed at the disturbance but not concerned. A few desperate colonists trying to make a statement, nothing more. David's team reached minimum safe distance. He looked back at the depot, now crawling with alien soldiers, probably 50 of them, all concentrated around the supplies they thought they were protecting. He felt a moment of hesitation. He was about to kill thinking beings, soldiers just following orders. Then he remembered the reports Amy had shown him, the images of human children in Drathari labor camps. He nodded to Otto. The German pressed the detonator. The explosion lit up the night like a second sun. The blast wave knocked David off his feet even at their distance. When his ears stopped ringing and his vision cleared, the depot was simply gone. In its place was a crater still glowing with burning fuel. Secondary explosions rippled through the area as ammunition cooked off. The Drathari warships parked nearby showed scorch damage along their hulls. The radio channels erupted with alien voices, confused and angry. David listened through the translator, hearing words like impossible and treachery and surrender agreement. They really had believed the humans would just accept slavery without resistance. Over the next 4 hours, similar explosions rocked the colony. Other resistance cells, following David's timetable, hit Drathari positions across New Haven. Water processing stations, communications relays, vehicle parks. Nothing that would harm colonists. Everything that would cripple the occupation. By dawn, Sarkhan stood in the ruins of his supply depot, his scales darkened with rage. Around him, his officers reported casualties. 73 Drathari dead, over 100 wounded, and massive material losses. From humans who had surrendered, from prey species who should have been grateful for the chance to serve the Empire. Deploy the Serpent Guard, he ordered, his voice cold enough to freeze nitrogen. I want the resistance leaders found and executed. I want this colony to understand the price of defiance. His second-in-command hesitated. Warlord, perhaps we should request reinforcements. These humans are more capable than— No, Sarkin cut him off. I will not report to the Empire that I needed help crushing a colony of primitives. The Serpent Guard will handle this. They always do. What Sarkin didn't understand, what none of the Drathari could comprehend, was that humans didn't calculate resistance the way other species did. They didn't weigh odds and choose rational courses of action. When pushed far enough, when faced with losing everything they loved, humans stopped thinking like prey and started acting like cornered predators. David and his people retreated into the mining tunnels, exhausted but grimly satisfied. They had bloodied the Drathari nose, proven that surrender papers meant nothing if the people refused to surrender. The real fight was just beginning, and the odds were still impossible. But David had learned something during Earth's last war, something he now taught his small band of resistance fighters. Sometimes impossible just meant nobody had been stubborn enough to try. The Serpent Guard arrived like death itself. Their armor was different from regular Drathari soldiers, black as void and covered in actual serpent designs that seemed to move in the light. Each warrior stood over 8 feet tall, enhanced through genetic modification and cybernetic implants. They were Sarkin's answer to resistance movements, and they had never failed to crush an uprising. David watched them deploy from his hidden position in the rocks above the colony. 60 Serpent Guard warriors, spreading out in perfect formation, their movements coordinated like a single organism. They carried weapons that could level buildings, and their armor could shrug off small arms fire. Against them, David had 47 colonists with mining equipment and desperation. The odds didn't matter anymore. They were past calculation, past rational thought. What mattered was making the Drathari pay for every inch of ground. Remember, David spoke into his radio, we're not trying to win battles. We're trying to make this occupation so costly they'll wish they never came. Hit and run, make them bleed, make them scared. Otto's voice crackled back. The charges are set at Crystal Gorge whenever the bastards show up. Crystal Gorge was a mining site 3 kilometers from the main colony, connected by a network of tunnels. The Drathari had detected energy signatures there and assumed it was a resistance hideout. They were right, but not in the way they thought. David had spent 2 days turning those tunnels into a death trap, using every piece of mining equipment and explosive Otto could provide. The Serpent Guard entered the gorge in force. 20 warriors moving with absolute confidence. They had fought rebellions on a dozen worlds, faced enemies with better weapons and training than these human primitives. The gorge walls rose high on either side, narrow enough that their superior numbers didn't matter. Perfect terrain for an ambush, but they didn't care. Their armor and training made them invincible. The first explosion came from above. Mining charges placed in the gorge walls detonated simultaneously, bringing down thousands of tons of rock. The Serpent Guard scattered, but the gorge was too narrow. Half of them disappeared under the avalanche. The others activated their armor's shields, deflecting falling debris. Then the second wave hit. Not rocks this time, but something worse. Otto had rigged industrial smelters in the tunnels above, filled with molten metal from the mining operations. The containers broke open, spilling liquid fire into the gorge. Even Serpent Guard armor had limits. The warriors screamed as superheated metal found gaps in their suits, cooking them alive inside their own protection. 3 warriors made it out of the gorge, their armor scorched and damaged. They ran directly into Ben's ambush team. The young man had learned fast over the past week, learned that honor and fair fights got you killed. He waited until the Drathari were in the open, then triggered the mines buried in the ground. Captured Drathari explosives, turned against their makers. When the smoke cleared, Crystal Gorge held nothing but corpses and twisted metal. 20 Serpent Guard dead in 15 minutes. David felt no satisfaction, only grim determination. They had won this encounter, but Sarkin had 40 more warriors and would be coming with everything he had. The Warlord's response was brutal. Drathari forces surrounded and destroyed 3 residential blocks, killing everyone inside. Sarkin announced that for every Serpent Guard death, 10 colonists would die. He expected this to break the resistance, to turn the population against David's fighters. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Colonists who had accepted surrender now joined the resistance. If they were going to die anyway, better to die fighting. David's 47 became 200 overnight. Most had no combat training, but they knew New Haven's terrain and they understood that surrender meant death, just slower and more humiliating. Amy made a discovery that changed everything. She had been studying dead Drathari warriors, analyzing their biology. The reptilian aliens had exceptional strength and resilience, but their hearing was their weakness. They perceived sound frequencies far beyond human range, which their neural implants automatically filtered. But if you could overwhelm those filters with the right frequency, you could disable a Drathari warrior in seconds. The mining equipment could generate those frequencies. The massive drills used for deep excavation operated at precisely the range that would cause Drathari neural feedback. Amy and Otto worked through the night, modifying portable drilling units into sonic weapons. The next Serpent Guard patrol walked into downtown New Haven, expecting scattered resistance. Instead, they found the streets empty and eerily quiet. Their sensors showed no heat signatures, no movement, nothing. The patrol leader signaled his warriors to spread out and search building to building. David watched from a rooftop, waiting. The Drathari were in position, surrounded by buildings rigged with Amy's sonic emitters. He gave the signal. The sound hit like a physical force, though humans could barely hear it. To the Drathari, it was agony. Their neural implants overloaded, feeding raw sensory input directly into their brains. Serpent Guard warriors collapsed, clawing at their helmets, trying to block out the noise that was tearing their minds apart. The resistance moved in fast. Even disabled, the Drathari were dangerous. Their armor still worked, their weapons still fired, but they were blind and disoriented, lashing out randomly. David's people used captured Drathari weapons, targeting the weak points Amy had identified. Joints, neck seals, the softer scales around the eyes. It was butchery, not combat. David hated every second of it, but he didn't stop. This was what resistance meant. Not glorious battles, but desperate measures. Not honor, but survival. 10 more Serpent Guard died that day. Then another 8 in an ambush at the water treatment plant. Then 5 more when a tunnel they were searching collapsed, triggered by remote explosives. The invincible warriors were being ground down by enemies who refused to fight fair, who used every dirty trick and advantage they could find. Sarkin watched the casualty reports with growing disbelief. The Serpent Guard had conquered planets. They had broken armies. Now they were being destroyed by miners and farmers using industrial equipment as weapons. It was impossible. It was humiliating. It was unacceptable. He called his remaining commanders together. 30 Serpent Guard left, plus the regular forces. Enough to crush the resistance if used properly. But proper tactics assumed the enemy valued their own lives, assumed they would retreat when faced with overwhelming force. These humans didn't retreat. They attacked from positions they couldn't escape from. They rigged buildings to collapse even if it meant dying in the rubble. They fought like they had nothing to lose because they truly didn't. They fight like animals, one commander observed, like wounded beasts that bite anything close enough to reach. David would have taken that as a compliment. He called his growing resistance together in the deep tunnels, looking at faces exhausted from constant battle. They had lost 80 people in the past 3 days. The Drathari had lost more, but they had reinforcements coming. The humans didn't. "We can't win this," someone said, voicing what everyone knew. "Even if we kill every Serpent Guard, they'll just send more ships." "Probably," David agreed. "But we're not trying to win. We're trying to make them understand that occupying human territory costs more than it's worth. We're teaching the galaxy that humans don't surrender. We don't quit, and we make terrible victims." He looked around the tunnel at his people. Scared, wounded, exhausted, but still fighting. They called their elite warriors the Serpent Guard because serpents are deadly predators. Know what eats snakes? Honeybadgers. Small, vicious creatures that don't care about odds or pain or danger. They just keep fighting until either they win or they're dead. "And which one are we?" Ben asked. David smiled grimly. "Both." 3 months of occupation had turned New Haven into a nightmare. Sarkin stood in what remained of his command center, staring at reports that made no sense. His forces controlled the landing zones, the government buildings, and the main colony structures. Yet they controlled nothing. Humans moved through tunnels his sensors couldn't penetrate. They struck from nowhere, killed his soldiers, and vanished like smoke. The Warlord had requested reinforcements twice now. Each time, his superiors denied the request. How could he need help with a single colony of primitives? The Empire was watching, and Sarkin knew his reputation hung by a thread. The commander who always conquered without major losses was now bleeding warriors daily to an enemy that should have been broken months ago. His remaining Serpent Guard numbered 18. 18 from an original 60. The regular forces were down to less than half strength. More than supplies and soldiers, Sarkin was losing something more valuable: the aura of invincibility. Other species in the Empire were watching New Haven. If humans could resist this successfully, others might try. David leaned against the tunnel wall, trying not to show how exhausted he was. The resistance had grown to over 400 fighters, but they had lost nearly 200 people. Every colonist knew someone who had died. The victory, if you could call it that, was measured in Drathari blood, and the simple fact that they still fought. Amy worked nearby, analyzing captured Drathari equipment. She looked worse than David, felt dark circles under her eyes and hands that trembled from fatigue, but her mind never stopped working, never stopped finding weaknesses to exploit. "I found something," she said quietly. "The Drathari use a centralized communication system. Everything routes through their command ship. If we could take it down, their ground forces would be isolated, unable to coordinate. That ship has shields and weapons that could level this entire colony," Otto pointed out. He was cleaning a captured Drathari rifle, one of dozens they had accumulated through ambushes and raids. "How do we even get close?" Ben spoke up from his corner. The young man had aged years in 3 months, his face harder and his eyes carrying the weight of things he had done. "We use a captured shuttle. We took one last week, remember? If we could get aboard with enough explosives." David understood immediately. It was suicide. The command ship would be heavily guarded, alert for tricks. Anyone attempting this wouldn't come back. But if it worked, it might break the Drathari ability to continue the occupation. It might give the resistance time to hold until Earth sent help, if help was even coming. "I'll lead the team," David said. "No," Amy replied firmly. You're the heart of this resistance. You die, it falls apart. I'll go. They argued for an hour before settling on a compromise. Ben would lead the assault team, 6 volunteers who understood. They were trading their lives for a chance to win. David would coordinate the ground attack that would cover their approach. Amy would stay in the tunnels, keeping the resistance organized if everything went wrong. The captured Drathari shuttle lifted off at sunset, its transponder broadcasting the correct authorization codes. Ben sat in the pilot seat, flying by instinct and the crash course Otto had given him. Behind him, 5 other colonists checked their weapons and explosives. They were terrified, and they didn't hide it. Fear meant you understood the stakes. Only fools felt no fear. The command ship loomed ahead, massive and intimidating. It could destroy the shuttle with a single weapons burst, but Sarkin's forces were stretched thin, and a shuttle with proper codes didn't register as a threat. The ship's hangar bay doors opened, admitting the shuttle to land. Drathari guards waited inside the hangar, routine inspection procedures. Ben and his team exited the shuttle, weapons concealed under stolen Drathari uniforms that fit poorly on human frames. The guards noticed immediately that something was wrong. One raised his weapon, opening his mouth to sound an alarm. Ben shot him first. The element of surprise lasted maybe 10 seconds, long enough for the assault team to secure the hangar and seal the blast doors. Alarms shrieked throughout the ship. The team ran deeper inside, following the route Amy had mapped from captured ship schematics. They had minutes, maybe less, before overwhelming force descended on them. On the ground, David launched simultaneous attacks on every Drathari position in the colony. The resistance came out of hiding, hitting hard and fast, keeping the enemy focused planetside and unable to respond to the ship assault. It was chaos, exactly what they needed. Ben's team fought through the command ship corridors. 2 colonists died in the first firefight, cut down by Drathari security. Another fell when they breached the engineering section, shot protecting the others while they planted explosives on the ship's reactor core. By the time they reached the bridge level, only Ben and 1 other remained. Sarkin was there, waiting in his combat armor. He had guessed their target and prepared his trap. The Warlord blocked the corridor, a nightmare figure of scaled armor and deadly weapons. Behind him, the ship's bridge and its critical systems. Between him and the humans, just empty space and inevitable death. "You are brave," Sarkin acknowledged, his voice amplified by his armor. "Brave and stupid. You cannot win this fight." Ben smiled tiredly. His companion, a woman named Rita who had lost her entire family to Drathari reprisals, armed the last explosive charge. "Don't have to win," Ben replied. "Just have to not lose." He charged. Sarkin's weapon tore him apart, but it bought Rita the seconds she needed. She threw herself at the Warlord, not trying to fight him, but simply to get past. The explosive charge in her hands beeped its final countdown. 3 seconds. Sarkin tried to throw her off, tried to escape the blast radius. Rita held on with desperate strength, accepting her death to ensure his. 2 seconds. The Warlord's armor could survive the explosion, probably, but the bridge behind them couldn't. The ship's critical systems, the communication arrays, the coordination networks that controlled Drathari forces across New Haven. 1 second. The explosion tore through 3 decks. Sarkin survived, his armor protecting him, but the damage was catastrophic. The bridge was destroyed. Communication systems went dark. The command ship, crippled and burning, began an emergency evacuation sequence. On the ground, Drathari forces suddenly found themselves isolated. No orders from command, no coordination between units. Each squad was on its own, and the humans swarmed them like wolves on wounded prey. Otto led teams that had memorized every Drathari position, striking before the aliens could reorganize. David fought in the streets, using every trick he had learned. The Drathari were better armed and armored, but they were confused and scared. For the first time, they faced an enemy that didn't retreat, that kept coming no matter how many fell. They had trained to fight armies. They had no idea how to fight, a population that treated every civilian as a potential soldier. The Serpent Guard made their final stand at the central landing pad. 18 elite warriors, the last of Sarkhan's pride. They formed a defensive circle, weapons facing outward, waiting for the human assault. They wouldn't break. They wouldn't run. They would die as warriors should, taking as many enemies with them as possible. David gave them that honor. He didn't send waves of colonists to be slaughtered. Instead, he surrounded the position and brought up Amy's sonic weapons, the modified, mining equipment that had broken so many Drathari before. The Serpent Guard fought through the pain, firing blindly, killing dozens. But in the end, even the Empire's finest warriors couldn't fight what they couldn't see. When silence fell over the landing pad, David walked through the carnage. So many dead, both human and Drathari. The victory felt hollow. They had broken the occupation, but the cost was staggering. Nearly half the colony's population gone. The survivors would carry scars forever. Sarkhan's command ship crashed in the wasteland beyond the colony, too damaged to maintain orbit. The Warlord himself survived, crawling from the wreckage in his scarred armor. He looked at the smoke rising from New Haven and understood that he had failed. Not just failed to conquer a colony, but failed to understand what he was fighting. These humans weren't prey. They were something the Drathari Empire had never encountered before, enemies who would rather die than submit. The crash site smoldered in the dawn light. David approached with 20 armed colonists, weapons ready for treachery. Sarkhan sat on a piece of twisted hull, his armor cracked and leaking fluids that might have been blood or hydraulic systems. Around him lay the bodies of his final guards, killed in the crash or by wounds they couldn't survive. The Warlord looked up as David approached. Without his helmet, Sarkhan's face was almost human in its exhaustion. "You should kill me now," the Drathari said. His translator was damaged, making his words sound distorted. "It would be the merciful thing." "Mercy isn't something you taught us," David replied. He gestured, and his people surrounded the Warlord but didn't fire. "Your forces are scattered. Your ships are destroyed or fleeing. Your occupation is over." Sarkhan laughed bitterly. "You think this is victory? The Empire has 1,000 fleets. They will send another Warlord and another, until your kind is broken or extinct. You have won a battle while ensuring you lose the war." David sat down on the wreckage across from him, his rifle across his lap. "Maybe. But we taught the Empire something important today. Humans aren't worth the trouble. Every world you try to occupy will cost you what New Haven cost. Eventually your Empire will decide there are easier targets." "You are fools," Sarkhan said, but there was something like respect in his voice. The rational choice was surrender. You would have survived, even if not in comfort. Instead, you chose collective suicide. "We chose freedom," David corrected, "and we didn't all die. Enough of us survived to rebuild. Enough survived to remember what we did here. The next time the Drathari come to a human colony demanding submission, they'll remember New Haven. They'll remember the honeybadgers who refused to be prey." The standoff ended when Otto arrived with repair teams. They had work to do. The colony was in ruins, infrastructure destroyed, food supplies critical. The surviving 30,000 colonists faced a brutal struggle just to survive until supply ships arrived from Earth. But they would survive. They had proven that already. Amy examined Sarkhan's injuries and decided the Warlord would live, though he would never fight again. His spine was damaged, his combat enhancements failing. David made the decision to keep him prisoner rather than execute him. Let the Empire see what happened to those who attacked humanity. Let them see their invincible Warlord broken and defeated. News of New Haven's resistance spread through the galactic community faster than anyone expected. The Drathari Empire tried to suppress the story, but too many species had been watching. Merchant guilds that traded with humans spread the tale. Other subjugated species whispered about it in secret. Humans, the newcomers everyone dismissed as weak, had broken a Drathari occupation through sheer stubborn refusal to quit. David spent the following weeks organizing reconstruction while fighting off exhaustion and nightmares. Every night he saw the faces of the dead, both human and Drathari. Ben's final smile. Rita's determination. The Serpent Guard warriors dying in agony from sonic weapons. War made monsters of everyone, and David felt the weight of what he had become. Governor Phillips had died in a Drathari reprisal strike. The council elected David as the new governor, a position he didn't want but couldn't refuse. The colony needed leadership, needed someone who understood that freedom had a price and that sometimes you had to pay it. 3 months after the battle, an Earth fleet arrived. 12 warships ready to liberate New Haven from Drathari occupation. Admiral Sarah Park stood on the bridge of her flagship, expecting to find a colony in chains or possibly wiped out entirely. Instead, she received a transmission from David, welcoming Earth's military to a free colony. The Admiral toured the ruins with David, seeing the improvised defenses and captured Drathari equipment. She listened as he explained their tactics, their losses, their impossible victory. When he finished, she stood silent for a long moment. "We should have been here," she finally said. "Earth should have protected you." "You're here now," David replied. "And the galaxy knows what happens when someone tries to enslave humans. That's worth something." The Earth fleet brought supplies, medical assistance, and engineers to help rebuild. They also brought official recognition of what New Haven had accomplished. David's defense would be studied in military academies. The tactics they developed would become standard doctrine for colonial defense. The term honeybadger entered military slang as a description for human combat philosophy: small, vicious, and absolutely unwilling to quit. Sarkin recovered enough to face trial. The Drathari Empire demanded his return, but Earth refused. The Warlord would answer for his crimes in human courts. The trial lasted weeks, documenting every atrocity, every execution, every civilian killed in reprisal strikes. The galaxy watched as the mighty Drathari was sentenced to life imprisonment for war crimes. During the trial, David testified about the occupation. When asked why the colonists chose to fight rather than surrender, he gave an answer that resonated across human space and beyond. "We fought because the alternative was slow death. We fought because our children deserved better than slavery. We fought because humans have this defect in our psychology, where we look at impossible odds and try anyway. The Drathari called us irrational. Maybe we are, but I'd rather be an irrational human than a rational slave." The Drathari Empire filed a formal complaint with the Galactic Council, demanding compensation for their losses and the return of their warlord. The Council, seeing which way political winds were blowing, denied the complaint. Humanity was no longer a minor species to be ignored. They were a power to be reckoned with, if only because they were too stubborn to know when they were beaten. New Haven rebuilt slowly. The scars remained, both physical and psychological. Memorials dotted the colony, listing names of the fallen. Children grew up hearing stories of the resistance, learning that freedom wasn't free and that sometimes you had to fight for what you believed in. David stood at the largest memorial on the anniversary of the first battle. Names covered the wall, hundreds of them. Ben Hayes, age 22. Rita Garcia, age 34. Otto Schmidt, age 56. The old German had died in the final week, killed covering a retreat that saved 20 others. Amy joined him, carrying flowers for her own lost friends. She had continued her research on Drathari biology, and her findings had been shared throughout human space. Every colony now knew the weaknesses to exploit, the tactics that worked. No human settlement would ever be as unprepared as New Haven had been. "Do you think it was worth it?" Amy asked quietly. David considered the question carefully. Nearly 20,000 dead. A colony in ruins, lives shattered by trauma and loss. Against that, freedom maintained and a message sent to the galaxy. He wasn't sure there was a right answer. "Ask me again in 50 years, he finally said, "when children who grew up free because of what we did can answer for themselves." The Drathari Empire withdrew from human space entirely, signing a treaty that recognized human territorial claims and forswore any future occupation attempts. Other aggressive species took note. Humanity might be physically weaker than many galactic powers, but they had something more dangerous: the willingness to pay any price for freedom. The Warlord had unleashed his Serpent, expecting easy victory. Instead, he learned that some prey refuses to be eaten, that some species fight with a fury born of desperation and determination. The Drathari Empire was ancient and powerful, but they had never faced an enemy quite like humanity. In the end, the Serpent was defeated not by superior force or technology, but by the simple, stubborn refusal to surrender. The honeybadgers of New Haven had taught the galaxy an important lesson: never mistake humanity's preference for peace as inability to wage war. 5 years passed. New Haven transformed from a battlefield into a thriving colony once more. The ruins were cleared, replaced by buildings that incorporated defensive features into their design. Every structure had reinforced shelters. Every street could become a firing position. The colonists remembered their lessons well. They would never be unprepared again. David walked through the rebuilt central square, no longer governor but still a figure everyone recognized. He had stepped down after 3 years, feeling that leading people in peace required different skills than leading them in war. The new governor was a civilian, someone who understood agriculture and trade better than tactics and ambushes. That was how it should be. The memorial wall now stood at the square's center, a massive structure of local stone with every name carved deep. Fresh flowers appeared there daily, placed by people who remembered. David himself came weekly, talking to the dead as if they could hear him. Maybe they could. He wasn't sure what he believed anymore about life and death and meaning. Amy found him there, as she often did. She had become New Haven's leading administrator for colonial defense research, her work on Drathari biology expanding into broader xenobiology studies. Her findings had saved lives on other colonies, giving humans the knowledge to defend against multiple alien species. "Earth wants you to come speak at the military academy," she said, handing him a data pad with the official request. "They're establishing a new training program based on New Haven's defense. They want the man who created the doctrine to teach it." David scrolled through the request without much interest. "I didn't create anything. We were desperate people doing desperate things. That's not doctrine, that's survival." "That's exactly what makes it valuable," Amy replied. "Every military in history trained soldiers to fight other militaries. You taught civilians to resist occupation. There's a difference, and the brass finally understands that." He knew she was right. Human space was expanding, colonies spreading across hundreds of worlds. Not all of them would have Earth's military protection. They needed to know how to defend themselves, how to make occupation so costly that potential invaders would think twice. "I'll consider it," David said, which they both knew meant he would refuse. He had done his part. Other people could teach the lessons. He just wanted to tend his small farm on the colony's outskirts and forget, even though he knew he never would. News from the broader galaxy continued to filter in. The Drathari Empire was fragmenting, internal conflicts tearing at their power structure. Sarkhan's defeat had exposed weakness, and other species within their empire were testing boundaries. 3 subject species had declared independence in the past year. The empire that had seemed invincible was learning that reputation mattered, and losing to humans had shattered theirs. Other alien species approached humanity with new caution and respect. Trade agreements became more favorable. Territorial disputes were settled through negotiation rather than force. Nobody wanted to be the next empire to learn what humans did when pushed too far. The honeybadger reputation spread, becoming both warning and protection. David received visitors sometimes, historians and military analysts wanting to interview him about the resistance. He usually refused, but occasionally he would talk if they seemed genuinely interested in learning, rather than glorifying war. He wanted people to understand the cost, not just the victory. One such visitor was a young woman from Earth, barely 20, studying colonial defense policy. She sat across from him on his porch, recording device active, eyes bright with academic curiosity. "What would you say to colonies facing similar threats?" she asked. "What's the most important lesson from New Haven?" David thought about all the prepared answers he could give. Tactics and strategy, logistics and coordination, all the things that sounded good in reports. Instead, he told her the truth. "The most important lesson is that freedom isn't free and it's rarely fair. We paid in blood for what we kept. A lot of good people died, and sometimes I wonder if we made the right choice. Maybe surrender would have been smarter. Maybe we could have found another way." He paused, looking at the memorial visible in the distance. "But we made our choice, and we lived with the consequences. Every colony will have to make that same choice if the time comes. Just make sure they understand what they're choosing." The young woman seemed disappointed, clearly wanting something more inspiring. David didn't care. Inspiration got people killed. Understanding kept them alive. Sarkhan remained imprisoned on Earth, a living symbol of humanity's victory. David heard reports that the former warlord had become cooperative, even helpful. He studied human culture, learned human languages, and provided intelligence about Drathari military capabilities. Some called it redemption. David called it survival instinct. Sarkhan was adapting to captivity the way he had once adapted to war. David never visited him. Some wounds didn't need reopening. But he read the Warlord's testimony about the occupation, the analysis of what went wrong from the Drathari perspective. It was clinical, detailed, and ultimately honest. The Empire had underestimated humanity because they measured strength in the wrong ways. They counted weapons and soldiers and ships, never considering that the greatest weapon was the refusal to accept defeat. New Haven's children grew up in peace, but they learned their history. Schools taught about the occupation, about the resistance, about the price their parents and grandparents paid. They practiced emergency drills and learned basic defense skills. The colony would never be caught unprepared again. David sometimes taught these classes, showing young people how to turn farming equipment into weapons, how to use terrain for advantage, how to coordinate without communications. They listened with the attention of those who hoped they would never need these skills but understood they might. Amy's research led to the creation of the Colonial Defense Initiative, a galaxy-wide network sharing information about potential threats and defense strategies. Colonies that had never met coordinated their security, shared intelligence, and supported each other. Humanity was building something new, a civilization that valued independence while recognizing the strength in unity. The memorial wall continued to grow, though thankfully not with new combat deaths. Instead, it expanded to honor resistance fighters who died of old age, who lived to see the peace they fought for. Each name added was a reminder that they had won not just survival but a future. David stood before the wall on what would have been Ben's 28th birthday. The young man never got to see the colony rebuilt, never got to know that his sacrifice changed history. David placed flowers under Ben's name and spoke quietly. "We did it. We survived. The colony is thriving. Humanity is respected, and your death meant something. I hope that's enough. I hope you'd be proud of what we built from the ashes." The wind carried his words away, but David felt lighter for speaking them. Guilt was a weight he would carry forever, but it was balanced now by the knowledge that those deaths achieved their purpose. New Haven was free. Humanity was stronger. The galaxy knew that humans might prefer peace but would fight like demons when pressed. Other colonies requested New Haven veterans to help establish their defenses. Otto's mining techniques became standard across human space. Amy's biological research was required reading in every colonial medical facility. The honeybadger doctrine spread, adapted and modified for different situations but always keeping the core principle: make occupation impossible through sheer bloody-minded resistance. David eventually accepted a teaching position, not at Earth's Academy but at New Haven's own colonial defense school. He felt more comfortable teaching people who understood firsthand what war meant, who had scars of their own. His classes were brutal and honest, stripping away any romance from combat. Students learned that victory meant surviving when your enemy expected you to break, that tactics mattered less than determination, that sometimes you had to do terrible things for reasons that were right. The galaxy settled into a new equilibrium. The Drathari Empire signed permanent peace treaties with humanity. Other aggressive species found easier targets than human colonies. Trade flourished, cultural exchange expanded, and for the first time since leaving Earth, humans felt secure in their place among the stars. But they never forgot. Every human colony maintained defenses. Every settlement taught its children what to do if threatened. The honey badger fury that saved New Haven became part of human identity, a promise to the galaxy and themselves. We will not be prey. We will not submit. Push us hard enough and we will show you what desperation unleashed can accomplish. David grew old on New Haven, watching new generations who knew peace but understood its cost. He wrote his memoirs not as glorification but as warning and instruction, ensuring that future humans would know both the necessity and the horror of what the resistance had done. On his final visit to the memorial wall, weak with age but determined, David read every name one last time. Hundreds of them, each representing a life cut short, a future lost, a sacrifice made. He added one more entry to the record, his own testimony for future generations. We were ordinary people facing impossible odds. We won not because we were special, but because we refused to lose. Remember that. Remember what we paid for your freedom. And if the time comes when you must make the same choice, remember that the cost is worth it. Being free and scared is better than being enslaved and safe. Never forget that some things are worth dying for, and freedom is first among them. The Warlord had unleashed his Serpent expecting easy victory. He learned that humanity possessed something more dangerous than any weapon, the simple, stubborn refusal to know when they were beaten. That lesson echoed across the galaxy, a warning carved in blood and sacrifice. The honeybadgers of New Haven had changed history not through superior technology or numbers, but through the oldest human trait of all. When backed into a corner with nothing left to lose, humans fought with a fury that surprised everyone, including themselves.